It was a Friday, 5 p.m. exactly. Richard Crane, CFO of Meridian Logistics, walked into my office, closed the door behind him, sat down across from me like a man who had rehearsed this more than once. He placed his hands flat on the table, calm, deliberate, the posture of someone who has done difficult things before and learned to do them without flinching. He said, "Marcus, we're letting you go." I looked at him. He continued, "Effective immediately. Your access will be revoked at end of day. Security will escort you out. HR has your severance paperwork ready." He stood up, straightened his jacket, the specific gesture of a man who considers something finished. The way you close a drawer you don't intend to open again. "Richard," I said. He paused at the door. "What time is it?" I asked. He frowned, checked his watch. 5:01, he said. I nodded slowly. "You might want to check your email," I said. He looked at me the way people look at something they don't understand but feel they should. A flicker of something behind the eyes. Not fear, not yet, just the first shadow of it. Then he left. 47 emails had left my server at exactly 5:01 p.m. To the CEO, to the board, to the external auditors, to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. 47 emails, each one containing a different piece of a file I had spent 6 months building, a file I had named, simply, the folder. Welcome to Virtue Line, where quiet men stop being quiet. Let's go back to the beginning. My name is Marcus Webb, 34 years old, Senior Financial Analyst at Meridian Logistics in Dallas, Texas. I have been doing this work for 11 years, and I am good at it. Not in the way that gets you celebrated at company all-hands meetings, in the way that actually matters. I find things that don't add up. Numbers have a specific kind of honesty that people don't. They don't lie intentionally. They don't have an agenda. They just reflect what happened. And when what happened doesn't match what was reported, the gap between those two things is where the truth lives. I have spent my entire career living in that gap. Meridian Logistics was founded by Carol Winters, 62 years old, built the company from a single freight brokerage in 2001 into a mid-size operation with 4 regional offices and about 300 employees. Carol is sharp, principled, and still knows every department head by name. She is the kind of founder who believes that if you build the right culture, the numbers take care of themselves. And for 15 years, she had trusted Richard Crane to watch the numbers. Richard Crane, 58 years old, silver hair, always cut close, expensive suits that were never flashy, that specific kind of money that tries not to be noticed. The CFO who had been in place since before I arrived, before half the company arrived. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately began assessing who in it was useful and who was a threat. He had a way of making you feel like he was your advocate while simultaneously deciding how much of your loyalty he could use. I had been at Meridian for 3 years before Richard ever really looked at me. When he did, I felt it the way you feel a change in the weather before the clouds arrive. And I understood in that moment that I should have been more careful about what I was finding. It started with a vendor invoice. March. A Tuesday morning with good coffee and my earbuds in. Routine quarterly reconciliation, the kind of work I can do halfway, except that I never do it halfway. An invoice from a vendor called Apex Consulting Services. $47,000 for strategic advisory services in Q4 of the previous year. I pulled the vendor file. Apex Consulting Services had no address beyond a P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware. No website. No other contracts in our system beyond this one. No contact person on file. No phone number. And no deliverable attached. No report. No presentation. No meeting record, no email thread, no summary, no slide deck. $47,000 for advisory services with no evidence that any advice was ever given, received, or requested. I flagged it internally, sent it to my direct manager Amy with a note, "Unusual vendor, no deliverable documentation, requesting clarification before close." Amy forwarded it to Richard the same afternoon. Richard responded in 11 minutes. 11 minutes. I noticed that. A $47,000 vendor question answered in less time than it takes to make a cup of coffee. Legitimate vendor. Strategic advisory on the Austin expansion. Close the ticket. I closed the ticket. I always close the ticket when directed to, but I kept a copy of the invoice. I kept a copy of Richard's response. I kept the timestamp. And I put them in a folder on my personal drive. A folder I had not named yet. Just a folder. Just in case. That evening I looked up Apex Consulting Services on my personal laptop at home, not on company systems. My own laptop, my own time, my own internet connection. My wife Diane asked what I was doing. I said I was looking something up. She looked at my screen, looked at me, and said what she always says when I get this particular look. "Marcus." Just my name. One word that means, "I see you. I know what this is, and I am already worried." Apex Consulting Services, registered in Delaware. Single member LLC. Registered agent from a corporate formation service in Wilmington. Beneficial owner not publicly listed. A standard shell structure. Clean on the surface. Designed to be clean on the surface. But Delaware keeps certain records. And a registered agent address can be cross-referenced with other companies filed on the same date by the same formation service. This is public information. It takes patience, not special access. Apex Consulting Services was filed on the same day as two other companies. One was called Summit Advisory Group. One was called Crestline Consulting LLC. I wrote those names down. I went to bed knowing I would not sleep well. I was right. The next morning I went back through Meridian's vendor payment records. 3 years of history. I had access to this as part of my role. This was not a gray area. This was my job. I was looking for two names, Summit Advisory Group and Crestline Consulting LLC. I found both. Summit Advisory Group, 11 payments over 2 years. Total, $312,000. Crestline Consulting LLC, 7 payments over 18 months. Total, $198,000. Combined with Apex, $557,000. $500,000 and more, paid to 3 companies with no addresses, no websites, no deliverables, and no contact persons. All approved, every single payment, by Richard Crane. I sat at my desk and looked at those numbers for a long time. In this work, you learn to distinguish between the feeling of finding a discrepancy and the feeling of finding something real. A discrepancy is a typo, a miscategorization, an honest mistake that reconciles when you look at the right column. What I was looking at did not feel like a discrepancy. It felt like something that had been very deliberately built to look like nothing at all. I called James Holloway that afternoon, business attorney. We had gone to college together, lost touch for years, reconnected through a mutual friend. I asked him to meet me for lunch off-site, not near the office, not anywhere Richard Crane might reasonably be. I laid out what I had found. James ate his sandwich and listened without interrupting. He was very good at listening. When I finished, he put the sandwich down and folded his napkin. "Marcus," he said, "if those 3 companies belong to who I think they might belong to, this is not a civil matter. This is not an HR complaint. This is not something you resolve through internal escalation." "I know," I said. "Have you told anyone at the company?" I flagged the first invoice. Richard shut it down in 11 minutes. James nodded slowly. "He knows you flagged it." "Yes." "Which means he knows you might keep looking." "Yes." James was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, how long do you think you have before he comes for your job?" I looked at my water glass. The ice had melted. I had not touched the drink. "I don't know," I said. "Not long."
Then we need to move faster than he thinks you can, James said. And we need to be smarter about where this goes when it's ready. He looked at me directly. Don't go to HR. Don't go to the board. Don't go to anyone inside that company without talking to me first. When you have enough, we go to the people Richard Crane cannot charm, pressure, or fire. I said, the FBI. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit, he said, and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, at the same time, simultaneously. So there's no single point of contact that can be managed. That's a serious step, I said. $500,000 in fraudulent vendor payments, he said, is a serious crime. He picked up his coffee. How certain are you? Certain enough that I didn't close the folder, I said. He nodded. Then let's talk about how you build it.
James gave me a framework. Document everything. Date stamp everything. Back up everything outside company systems. Not on your work laptop. Not on your work email. Not on anything that can be remotely wiped. Keep every access within your normal documented role permissions. Do not go anywhere you don't have authorization to go. The moment you step outside your authorized access, you become the story instead of the evidence. And Marcus, he said at the end of that lunch, set up the dead man switch before you do anything else. I had never heard the term. He explained it. An automated email delivery, scheduled, future dated. The emails go out at a specific time on a specific day unless you actively log in and cancel the send before it triggers. If you can't cancel, if your access is revoked, if you're fired, if you're suspended, if something happens to you, the emails go automatically to everyone who needs to see them. It protects you, James said, because firing you becomes the worst mistake he ever makes. The moment he pulls the trigger, the information goes. He cannot stop it. He cannot contain it. And he cannot claim he fired you for cause when 47 emails go out 1 minute after he lets you go. I went home that evening and set it up. 47 emails, scheduled to send every Friday at 5:01 p.m. unless I logged in before 5 and canceled. I chose Friday because Richard always left early on Fridays. If something happened on a Friday, I wanted the weekend to work in my favor, not his. And then I opened a new folder on my personal encrypted drive. I named it The Folder, and I started building. Over the next 6 weeks, I became the most invisible employee at Meridian. I arrived on time every morning. I left on time every evening. I completed every assignment ahead of schedule. I asked no unusual questions. I attended every meeting and contributed exactly as much as my role required. Not less, which would raise flags, and not more, which would draw attention. I talked about the Dallas Cowboys. I asked about people's weekends. I made the coffee in the break room on Wednesdays because I had always made the coffee on Wednesdays and I was not going to change anything. And every evening, after Diane went to sleep, I sat at my personal laptop in the kitchen with a glass of water and I worked on The Folder. What I was building was not a complaint. A complaint is something you hand to someone and hope they do something with. What I was building was a case, the kind of thing that, when it lands on a federal agent's desk, already contains its own conclusions and the evidence to support them. The kind of thing that makes someone's job easy because all the difficult work has already been done. I cross-referenced every payment to all 3 companies with the Delaware registration records. I mapped the bank routing numbers from the wire transfers, which were on the payment records I had authorized access to, against the dates of Richard's personal financial disclosures to the board. I built a timeline. I built a payment history. I built a vendor relationship map showing that all 3 companies had been created by the same registered agent within a 72-hour window. And then I found the trail. The beneficial owner of all 3 shell companies, protected by layers of nominees and corporate shields, traced back to a trust. A trust established in Nevada in 2019 under Richard Crane's wife's maiden name. Not her married name, her maiden name, the one that required an extra step to connect. He had been doing this since 2019, 1 year after Carol Winters had offered a profit-sharing arrangement to her senior leadership team and structured it in a way that left Richard, who had been at the company longer than anyone, with a smaller share than he believed he deserved. He had filed the first shell company within 9 months of that decision. He had been paying himself back ever since. 5 years, $557,000 for Meridian alone. And I wrote that word,
alone, in my notes that night, and underlined it twice, because the structure was too practiced, the shell creation too clean, the nominee layers too deliberate. This was not the first time he had done this. The question was where else he had done it. I brought that question to James at our third meeting. James got very still when I told him about the trust. He asked to see my documentation. He read it for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Marcus, we need to talk about the Cayman account."
I said, "What Cayman account?" He said, "The one I think is going to be there if we look in the right place." He explained that shell company structures at this level of sophistication, with multiple nominees, cross-state registration, a trust under a different surname, are almost never built for a single purpose. They are infrastructure. They exist to move money from multiple sources into a single collection point. And the most common collection point, for money that needs to disappear cleanly, is an offshore account. He had access to a licensed financial intelligence database through his firm. He ran the routing numbers. It took 3 days. There was a Cayman Islands account, opened in 2018. $1,100,000 received over 5 years from the 3 shell companies. But the total in that account was larger than what had come from Meridian's payments alone, significantly larger, meaning Richard Crane had done this somewhere else, possibly several somewhere else's. I sat in my kitchen with that information and felt the thing I always feel when a number reveals more than it was supposed to. Not satisfaction, not excitement, something quieter and colder. The feeling of understanding something that you can no longer understand. I updated the folder. I called James. "It's bigger than we thought," I said. He said, "I know. Don't go into the office tomorrow." "I have to," I said. "If I don't show up, he'll know something's happening." James exhaled slowly. "Then go in, do your job. Be exactly who you always are. And Marcus, make sure you do not cancel those emails." "I won't," I said. "When?" he asked. "Friday," I said. The HR meeting arrived before Friday did. It was a Monday morning, 8 weeks into my investigation. Pam Torres, HR director, stopped by my desk with a folder. The kind of folder HR carries when the conversation is going to happen whether you want it to or not. "Marcus," she said, "can we find some time this week?" "Of course," I said. "What's it about?" She kept her face neutral, professionally, carefully neutral. "Just a performance check-in." I had not had a performance concern raised in 3 years at Meridian. My last 2 annual reviews had been strong. I had delivered every project on time. I had flagged discrepancies that saved the company money. There was no legitimate basis for a performance conversation, which meant this was not about performance. "I'm free Thursday morning," I said. "How about tomorrow?" she said. The speed of that answer told me everything. I texted James from the parking lot during my lunch break. I told him about the HR meeting. He asked, "How complete is the folder?" 80%, maybe 85. He said, "It needs to be 100 before Friday. Can you do that?" "I can do that." "Good. Now tell me what the meeting is going to say." I told him what I expected. He helped me prepare, not to fight it, to document it, to respond in ways that created a clear record of what was being said, who was saying it, and what the real purpose was. Because a false performance action is itself evidence of retaliation, and evidence of retaliation, layered on top of fraud documentation, makes a case significantly stronger. The meeting was Tuesday at 9 a.m. Richard was there. He had positioned himself at the side of the room, not running the meeting, just present, observing, the way predators are present when they want to watch something without appearing to be watching. Pam Torres read from a prepared document. The language was careful, designed to sound like concern, not accusation. "We've received some feedback about focus and work patterns. Specifically, time spent on tasks outside your core responsibilities, and some questions about data access patterns in the financial systems. I said. Data access patterns? Yes, specifically vendor payment records that may be outside your normal scope. Vendor payment reconciliation is part of my quarterly role, I said. It's in my job description. I have written authorization for that access in my original employment agreement. Pam looked at the document, then at Richard, then back at the document. Richard said smoothly, "We're noting a pattern of extended access that goes beyond what's typically required for the role." "Has my access log shown anything that falls outside my documented authorization?" I asked. A pause. "We're still reviewing." "When the review is complete," I said, "I'd be happy to walk through my access history and the business purpose for each query. Everything I have accessed is within my authorized scope. If there's a specific instance that's in question, I'd welcome the opportunity to explain it." Richard's eyes stayed on me for exactly 3 seconds longer than the conversation required. That was the tell, not the words. The 3 seconds. "This is just a check-in," Pam said. "No formal action is being taken." "I appreciate the transparency," I said. "Is there anything else?" There wasn't. I walked out, went to the restroom, ran cold water over my wrists, looked at myself in the mirror, and said very quietly, 4 more days. That afternoon, my colleague Amy walked past my desk and dropped a folded piece of paper without slowing down. Old school, deliberate, something she had thought about. I opened it under the edge of my keyboard. It said, "R asked Pam to pull your full access logs for 90 days. Be careful, you didn't hear this from me." I looked across the floor. Amy was at her desk, eyes on her screen, not looking at me. She had worked at Meridian for 7 years. She had stayed quiet for a long time. A handwritten note was how she had decided to stop staying quiet. I texted James one word, "accelerating." He replied in 30 seconds, "Friday still the plan?" I typed back, "Friday." And James, "I need Thursday night to finish the last section." He replied, "I'll be available. Call me when it's done." I spent the rest of that week being perfect. Tuesday afternoon, I submitted my quarterly reconciliation report, complete, accurate, 2 hours early. Wednesday, I attended a department meeting and contributed exactly what was expected of me. Thursday, I had lunch in the cafeteria and talked about the Cowboys and asked about Pam's daughter's soccer tournament. I was cheerful. I was present. I was the version of Marcus Webb that Richard Crane believed he had under control. Thursday evening, I sat at my kitchen table until 2 a.m. and completed the folder. Every shell company fully documented with sources. Every wire transfer mapped to its authorization date and approver. Every vendor payment cross-referenced with the Delaware registration timeline. The beneficial ownership trail through the trust to the Cayman account. The gap between what Meridian had paid out and what was in the Cayman account, evidence of other victims. The full timeline of Richard's access to the systems where approvals were entered, cross-referenced with the payment dates, 100%. I called James at 2:15 a.m. He picked up like a man who had been waiting. "It's done," I said. "Send it to me," he said. I sent him the encrypted file. He reviewed it for 40 minutes while I sat in the kitchen drinking water and listening to the house be quiet around me. Diane asleep upstairs, the refrigerator humming, the city outside the window doing whatever cities do at 2 a.m. James called back. "Marcus," he said, "this is enough. This is more than enough." A pause. "Are you ready for what Friday means?" "Yes," I said. "It's going to move very fast after," he said. "Once those emails go, there is no version of events where Meridian is a safe place for you to be Monday morning. You understand that?" "I understand that." "And you're okay with that?" I looked at the kitchen, at the coffee maker I had used every morning for 3 years, at the drawer where Diane kept takeout menus we never threw away, at the window where I could see the beginning of the street we had chosen because it felt like the right place to build something. "I'm more than okay with it," I said. "I've been ready for 6 months." Friday arrived the way important days always do, looking exactly like every other day until it doesn't. I drove to the office, parked in my usual spot, got coffee, sat at my desk, opened my email, responded to 3 messages, reviewed a report, did the work I was hired to do with the same care I had always brought to it, because the work deserved that regardless of what else was happening. At 11:30, Richard came to my desk. Not Pam. Richard himself. He asked me to join him in the small conference room. I said, of course. He closed the door, sat down, folded his hands, and then he offered me the promotion. He framed it as an opportunity, a chance to start fresh, to apply my skills in a new environment, to be recognized for my value to the organization. Senior Analyst in the Austin office, a pay increase, more responsibility, a fresh start. Nobody has to know, he said, what you think you found. You take the role, we move forward, everyone benefits. I looked at him for a long moment. I wanted to study this. I wanted to understand the specific mechanics of how a man who has stolen more than $500,000 sits across a table from the person who found it and offers them a promotion with the same expression he would use to discuss quarterly earnings. He believed I was afraid. He believed the performance meeting had worked. He believed that the right combination of threat and reward would turn me into someone who would take the money and look away. Richard, I said, I appreciate you sharing that. Can I have the weekend to think about it? He studied me. Of course, he said. Take the weekend. I went back to my desk. 3:47 p.m., 1 hour and 13 minutes. I filed 2 reports. I answered 3 emails. I updated a tracking sheet that nobody would look at until Monday. I was the most productive employee in that building between 3:47 and 5 on a Friday afternoon. At 4:58, Richard walked out of his office with his jacket over his arm. He looked across the floor at me. I looked up from my screen. I waved once, the way I always waved when he left. He nodded, walked to the elevator. The doors closed. 5 p.m. I logged out of my work computer. I put on my jacket. I picked up my bag. I did not open my personal account. I did not cancel the send. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button. The doors opened. 5:01 p.m. I was inside the elevator when 47 emails left a scheduled server and arrived simultaneously in 31 inboxes across 6 organizations. I did not feel triumphant in that moment. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something much quieter, the specific kind of relief that comes not from winning, but from finally telling the truth in a room that has been full of lies for a very long time. The elevator reached the parking garage. The doors opened. Richard was standing 20 feet away. He had not left. He was on his phone, reading something. When he looked up and saw me, his face did something I had never seen it do in 3 years. It went uncertain. "Marcus," he said, "I need you to come back upstairs." "I'm done for the day," I said. Something happened. He held up his phone. "You sent emails." "I send a lot of emails," I said. "Not those emails, not to those people." His voice had dropped. The smoothness was gone. What was underneath it was harder and colder and much less composed. I looked at him in the parking garage in the early evening light, and I thought about 11 minutes, about how long it had taken him to close the ticket on a $47,000 vendor with no deliverable, about 5 years of stolen money, about a trust in his wife's maiden name, about a Cayman account that was growing while Carol Winters's company funded it without knowing. "Richard," I said, "I think you should go back inside and call your personal attorney." I got in my car. I sat in the parking garage for 4 minutes, not because I needed the time, because I wanted to be still for a moment before everything started moving fast. Then I drove home. Monday morning. My work email access had been revoked over the weekend, which meant Richard had moved, quickly and in the wrong direction, because by Monday morning, Carol Winters had spent the weekend reading 47 emails. The external auditors had spent the weekend reading 47 emails, and 2 agents from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit were already on their way to Meridian's Dallas office. James called me at 8:15. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "What's happening?" "Carol Winters has been trying to reach you since Saturday morning. She got your personal number from the employee directory. She called me 20 minutes ago. She wants you to come in." "As a terminated employee?" I said. "As a material witness," James said, "to something she clearly did not know was happening inside her own company." My personal phone buzzed. An unknown number with a Dallas area code. "Marcus Webb," I answered. "Marcus?" Carol Winters's voice, controlled, but underneath it, something shaken, something reorganizing. "I need you to come in this morning. I need to understand what I'm looking at, and I need you to walk me through it." "I'll be there at 10, I said. I put on the same jacket I had worn on Friday. I drove to Meridian. I parked in my usual spot. The access gate still recognized my license plate because nobody had thought to remove it from the system yet. I walked through the lobby. The receptionist looked at me with the specific expression of someone who has received conflicting information about whether to let a person in. Carol met me at the elevator. She looked different from every other time I had seen her. Not smaller, but as though something she had been carrying for a long time had suddenly revealed its actual weight. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Of course," I said. We walked to the boardroom. 2 FBI agents, the lead external auditor, Meridian's general counsel, and Carol. Richard Crane was not there. Agent Chen, the lead agent, precise and still in the way of someone who asks questions professionally, looked at my documentation for 12 minutes without speaking. Then she said, "Mr. Webb, how did you access the Delaware registration records?" "Public database," I said. "Personal laptop, personal time. Everything I accessed at work was within my documented authorization." She nodded. "The Cayman account trace, how was that done?" "A licensed financial intelligence database my attorney has access to. He pulled the data on my behalf." She looked at James. He confirmed it. She closed the folder. "Mr. Webb," she said, "what you have put together here is more comprehensive than what our unit typically receives from corporate whistleblower filings. The documentation is organized, the sourcing is clean, and the narrative is clear." She paused. "Richard Crane's attorney called our office this morning. We're aware he's seeking representation." She looked at Carol. "He has not separated himself from our investigation." Carol looked at the table, then at me. "Why didn't you come to me directly?" she said. "Because when I flagged the first invoice internally," I said, "Richard closed it in 11 minutes. Because the performance check-in last week was his meeting, not Pam's. Because I didn't know who inside this building knew what. And because if I had come to you and Richard found out before I had enough, he would have moved faster than I could document." Carol was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but the steadiness was earned. "I trusted him for 15 years. "I know," I said. "He was very good at being trusted," I said. She looked out the boardroom window at the Dallas skyline, at the city her company served, at the things she had spent 23 years building, inside which something had been quietly taking from her for 5. "How long?" she asked. "The shell companies go back to 2019, I said. "The Cayman account suggests there may be other companies before Meridian. The agents would know more than I do about that." Agent Chen said in the tone of someone who already has the answer, "We're looking into that." Richard Crane was arrested on a Wednesday, 14 days after the folder went out. 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of money laundering, 1 count of filing false financial disclosures with a publicly regulated entity. His attorney issued a statement saying he intended to contest the charges vigorously. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division, which had received its own set of those 47 emails, opened a parallel inquiry into the fraudulent expense deductions and the tax treatment of the offshore transfers. The FBI investigation expanded within 60 days to include
2 other companies where Richard had served in senior financial roles in the preceding decade. I do not know the full scope of what they found there. I was not a party to those investigations. But Agent Chen called James once, 6 months later, with an update that James relayed to me in 3 words. It was bigger. Richard's wife filed for divorce in the month following his arrest. The Cayman account was frozen as part of the federal asset seizure. The trust in her maiden name was subject to civil forfeiture proceedings. Carol called me 10 days after the arrest. She asked me to come back. Not as a senior analyst, as interim director of financial integrity, a role she said she was creating because what the folder had revealed was not just a crime. It was a failure of systems, a failure of oversight, a failure of the structures that should have made it impossible for one person to build something like this inside a company that was otherwise well run and genuinely led by someone who cared. I told her I needed a week to consider it. James told me I should negotiate. I did. Salary that reflected the actual scope of the role, equity participation in the company, something I had not had before. A direct reporting line to Carol, bypassing any CFO until a new one was fully vetted. A written acknowledgement in my employment agreement that no adverse action could be taken related to anything connected to the events of the preceding year. Carol agreed to all of it. I came back on a Monday. Same parking spot, same coffee machine. Different wait when I walked through the door. Amy came to my office on my first day back. She stood in the doorway for a moment before she said anything. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," she said. "I wasn't sure either," I said. She came in and sat down. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "For about 2 years, I knew. I saw things that didn't make sense, vendors I couldn't find anywhere, payments that didn't match any project I was aware of. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. And Richard was very good at making you feel like you were the one who didn't understand something." "You passed me the note," I said. She looked at her hands. "1 note. After 2 years. "It was the right note," I said. "At the right time." She nodded slowly, and I sat with something I had not expected to feel in that moment, which was compassion. Not for Richard, not for any of what he had done, but for the specific position that Amy had been in. The position of seeing something wrong and not having the framework or the protection or the language to act on it. I had the training, the experience, the contacts, and the particular stubbornness of someone who cannot leave a number unexplained.
Amy had a handwritten note and the courage it took to drop it on someone's desk without stopping. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. The whistleblower filing that James had submitted to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division contained one piece I had not yet told you about. When Meridian paid the 3 shell companies and categorized those payments as business consulting expenses, they were deducted on the company's federal tax returns. Fraudulent deductions, since the expenses were not legitimate. The IRS assessed Meridian for back taxes and penalties on those deductions, which Carol paid, because the company's liability was real, even though it was Richard who had created it. But the IRS whistleblower program is designed to reward the people who surface this kind of fraud. A percentage of what the government collects, paid to the person whose documentation made the collection possible. 18 months after that Friday, a check arrived. I did not spend it. I did not put it in our savings account. I did not use it to pay down a loan or upgrade a car or do any of the practical things that money is for. I opened an account for my daughter, who was 2 years old at the time. She has a middle name that means truth in a language her grandmother speaks. She does not know the account exists. She does not know what funded it. Someday she will, and when she asks where it came from, I will tell her that her dad found a number that didn't add up, and he stayed with it until he understood what it meant, And then he did what the evidence required him to do. That is the whole story. Not a dramatic one, in most of the ways we usually mean that word. No screaming. No confrontation in a parking lot. Well, one very brief one. No courtroom testimony. No moment of cathartic public vindication. Just a folder. 47 emails. 6 months of showing up every morning and being exactly who I had always been. Meridian brought in a new CFO 6 months after Richard's conviction. Dr. Sandra Lee, 15 years in forensic accounting before moving to corporate finance. On her first day, she came to my office, sat across from me and said, "I read the folder." "All of it?" I asked. "3 times, she said. "It's the cleanest fraud documentation I have ever seen outside a formal federal investigation. The sourcing is airtight. The narrative is linear. The conclusions follow directly from the evidence without any gaps." She looked at me. "How did you know when you had enough?" I thought about that for a moment. I knew when the story the numbers were telling matched the story the structure was built to hide, I said. When those two things aligned, that's when I knew. She nodded. "And if he had offered you more? The promotion, the money, something bigger?" "It wouldn't have changed anything," I said. "Why not?" I looked at the Dallas skyline outside my window, at the city I had chosen to build something in, at the work that had been done in this building before I arrived, and that would continue after I left. At all the people whose paychecks depended on a company that had been quietly being stolen from. "Because the $557,000 didn't belong to him," I said, "and no amount of money he could offer me belonged to me. Those are 2 different things." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lucky for this company that you understand the difference." I have thought about that sentence often in the time since. Not because it was flattering, but because it identified something true about what this work actually is at its core. The difference between a number that belongs where it is and a number that has been put somewhere it was never supposed to go. That difference is everything. It is the entire job. It is the reason the job matters. My daughter turns 3 next spring. She has her mother's eyes and, apparently, her father's tendency to notice when something doesn't add up. Last week she told me that her cereal had fewer pieces than yesterday. She was correct. I had checked. I think she is going to be fine. That is my story. 1 vendor invoice. 1 personal laptop. 6 months of being invisible on purpose. 47 emails at 5:01 p.m. on a Friday. And a folder that told the truth because someone refused to close it. If you have ever found something that didn't add up and had to decide whether to keep looking, drop a comment. Tell me what you found and what you did with it. Share this with someone who needs to know that the quiet ones are always building something. Like this video if you stayed until the end. Subscribe to Virtue Line. Because quiet men, we keep the folder. See you in the next one.